Let's bring in Dr. Kabir Adamu, who is a security expert and the CEO of Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight. Well, I mean, what a somber mood, really. And, you know, to think that this would be the third Chief of Army Staff that will, you know, die in service. Well, let's talk about his legacy. I mean, listening to that report, he definitely was the best man for the job at the time, you know, he was appointed. Let's, you know, talk about that first.
Yeah, let me start by joining you and I think the generality of Nigerians in paying my condolences first to his family, to the army, to the entire Nigerian military, and of course the country as a whole. No doubt this is an officer who over the 14 months thereabout, or depending on how you look at it, 16 months, that he has steered the affairs of the Nigerian army, has proven himself to be committed, to be a professional, and to have understood the challenges that confronted the Nigerian army vis-a-vis its situation within the Nigerian military as a whole. In terms of leadership, he provided strategic leadership. He was one Chief of Army Staff that you heard very little from, but he was in the forefront of providing direction, which is what strategic leadership was about. Welfare of the troops, he put that forward and tried his best within the limits of what he could do to address several challenges, both in terms of payments, in terms of the several other components of their welfare. Equipment repository of the Nigerian army. With the support of the president, he has improved significantly the operational capability of the Nigerian army, both in terms of equipment that were procured and then the types of training, which was very strategic to support both the procurement of the equipment and then the threat elements that the army was dealing with. His relationship with the president was also instrumental. It supported some of what he was able to achieve. So I think he's left behind quite a huge legacy that would be really difficult for anyone coming behind him to feel. And I think the emotions that you've seen being expressed from the leadership, from within the rank and file of the army, is a testament to the fact that he did touch lives both professionally and personally.
You know, listening to you now, for some, they now understand the import of what Nigeria is going through. We've lost a fine general and someone who is a patriot, going by what he's done so far. Now, legacies are things that you kind of immortalize you somehow. And speak to us on some of those things that the country can do by immortalizing the late Lagbaja that will ultimately ginger those coming behind to say, look, after all, if I'm gone, my country will remember me for who I was.
I think the president has commenced that. The fact that the Federal Executive Council meeting of today was cancelled to recognize that we've lost you know, someone as important as a Chief of Army Staff. The fact that our national flag will be flying at half-mast for 7 days. Those are very significant and instrumental gestures by the president. But beyond that, I think the Ministry of Defense, the Defense Headquarters, and the Nigerian Army would need to look critically and come up with clear measures and steps to immortalize him, quote and unquote. And that can be done in various ways. It could be naming certain, say, institutions, schools after him, coming up perhaps with a competition, you know, around what he represented, and then of course naming that competition, you know, in his name, as it were. Gestures like that. Of course, his family, their welfare. He's got kids. I don't know how old the kids are. I've seen the wife of the president, the first lady, visiting his wife, making sure that within the limits of what we can do we provide for them as a country, so that the kids, continue their school, whatever the wife is doing, supporting her in that capacity. So things like that, I think, would go a long way towards immortalizing, as it were, the person of.
Now, let me bring back a quote that was, credited to him. "We are agents of democracy and have no desire to truncate it," quoting the late Lieutenant General, the late Chief of Army Staff. He made the statement at a time when the wind of coups, was blowing around the West Africa sub-region and, of course, the Sahel. How instructive is that?
So one of the, I would say, beauty of this current crop of service chiefs is their dedication to the democratic tenets. From the Chief of Defense Staff to the 3 other service chiefs, they have repeatedly, over time, demonstrated, both in terms of spoken words and in terms of actions, their commitment to upholding democracy and subjecting themselves, which for me is even more important, to the institutions of democracy. With regards to the late Chief of Army Staff, because of the importance of the army within the setup that the Nigerian the defense headquarters represents, it was absolutely important that he makes that statement, and then not only make the statement, commit himself to it. I don't think it's a hidden secret, as it were. The army represents the strongest and most influential unit within the military, armed forces. And so when the leadership of that army commits himself and makes statements like that, it goes a long way towards solidifying and ensuring that our politicians, in fact, feel relaxed to be able to do what they can do. I mentioned earlier on that he's got an excellent relationship with the president, so that perhaps may also have influenced some of those statements that we've seen. But by and large, the current crop, the service chiefs that we have over time repeatedly demonstrated their commitment to upholding the democratic tenets.
Okay, before I let you go, how do we as a nation ensure that his demise does not affect his troop, his men, his officers? Though there's a new man, but when you have this affinity with a leader who's gone, you need to look out for those people he left behind. So how do we ensure that, they don't drop the ball?
Well, I'm quite excited with the statements by the current, as it were, acting Chief of Army Staff. I think it was just yesterday where he repeated and mentioned that he would uphold the legacy of the now late Chief of Army Staff, Taoreed Lagbaja. So that's a good, I think, indication. The fact that he recognizes that it's a legacy, and the fact that he's committing himself to upholding that legacy. And that's just one step. The statement, what is important is the action. So I would recommend to him to, he's part of the system, although a little bit outside the system before his appointment. So perhaps conducting an audit.
So what do you mean by a little bit outside?
He wasn't in the army headquarters. So now that he's back into the headquarters, as it were, it will probably, he needs a little bit of time to catch up, as it were, even though the army system, as it were, the various units. I don't want to talk about the internal politics within the army. So perhaps conducting an audit to identify, in terms of the issues that we've talked about, welfare, equipment repository, name them, conducting an audit to find out where they are within the implementation of the strategic plan that the army has, and then committing himself to continuing within that line. Right. He shouldn't play with the welfare of the troops.
Very important.
It's very important, especially those in the front line.
You can say that again. Dr. Kabir Adamu, security expert, CEO, Beacon Consulting. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight.